Hey everyone, this is Erica Lucas, your host and founding member of VEST, an organization connecting women across industries, regions, and career levels so that together we can expedite the pipeline of more women in positions of power and influence. Welcome to another episode of the Vester podcast, where we explore the invisible barriers holding women back in the workplace and share stories of women building power collectively.
I never felt like I had to ask permission. And I think women do that to themselves frequently. I think that is part of being in a patriarchal society. I think in Oklahoma, it has a lot to do with fundamentalist religion. My parents raised me with a great amount of self-confidence that I could tackle any role and that gender didn't have to matter. And that was a beautiful thing to be raised with. I realize that I am privileged in that area. So I don't fight with the imposter syndrome because I always assumed that I should have a seat at the table. So I think we need to be raising our young women to assume that's natural instead of something that there should even be a barrier for. We always think that if we elect more women, things will be better. Often we elect more women that don't take on those issues. Why have we elected all these people that want to save my soul? Go do that in a pulpit on Sunday morning. I need people to come to the legislature that want to work on good schools, mental health care systems, infrastructure, things that allow a society and its citizens to flourish.
In this episode, we talked to Oklahoma Labor Commissioner Leslie Osborne about imposter syndrome and the systems that help manifest self-doubt in women. Whether or not it's true that having more women in office will help us achieve progress more quickly, and what it's like for her to advocate for sound middle-of-the-road policies in one of the most conservative states in the nation. This recording was part of a more intimate coaching session with VEST members and has been repurposed to accommodate this episode. So, Leslie, why don't we start with you telling us what the hell does the Labor Commissioner do?
That's a very good question. And before I came into state government, I would have had no idea. We offer a lot of services that are very beneficial to small businesses and are free, also to citizens. And most people would assume, being labor department, that we have a lot to do with maybe union and non-union issues. Not really. They would assume a lot of people assumed that we did unemployment. Thank goodness, with all the nightmare of that with COVID, that was at another agency in Oklahoma, OESC. What we do is ensure that there are safe workplaces for citizens across the state and that citizens' wages are paid. We make sure we're the enforcement agency to make sure that people are adhering by child labor laws. It's different if you employ somebody under 18. And we also make sure on a lot of things, we're also the safety agency for citizens. Just a brief recap is that we check every public access elevator and escalator in the state once a year for safety, every commercial grade hot water heater and boiler, vehicle conversions from compressed natural gas to normal gas or diesel, amusement park rides, check all of those once a year. And it's just a lot of things that people don't assume. It's a pretty small agency. We have 80 employees, but we multitask. And so if you're inspecting rides in the summer, then you're doing boilers in the winter. We have a really great cross-trained staff and just do a lot to make sure that small businesses are keeping their employees safe on the job that can't afford full-time safety consultants is probably our main push.
I love it. And one of the reasons why we invited you here, right? I mean, obviously, the main goal for VEST is to connect women across industries, regions, and sectors so that we can build power collectively, but also to fix workplaces, right? Because for so long, we've been telling women to fix themselves so that we can achieve positions of power. In reality, we needed to fix the systems and the workplaces, like you mentioned, to be fruitful spaces for not just women, but for everyone in general. So this month for us, we've been dwelling into imposter syndrome and, how it manifests and also the systems that contribute to us feeling like imposters and a fraud. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome in your career?
I hate to say this because this is the topic of the month, but I don't think I have. And I think a lot of people do. I have challenges in other areas, but for some reason, and I'm not sure exactly what it was, my parents raised me with a great amount of self-confidence that I could tackle any role and that gender didn't have to matter. And that was a beautiful thing to be raised with. Very functional home. When we talk about ACE scores, and stuff, I realize that I am privileged in that area. It's not close with my father. That's the only area that I have some of that area in. But I'm one that never felt like, and I use this in speeches, I never felt like I had to ask permission. And I think women do that to themselves frequently. I think that is part of being in a patriarchal society. I think in Oklahoma, it has a lot to do with fundamentalist religion, that so many of the people that make up our citizenship have lived with those types of roles. The woman is the helpmate kind of thing is what we have evolved past. I grew up in the Methodist church, which was not that way as much, but then in college married a young man who was Church of Christ. If anyone knows, more of a fundamentalist type religion. And so that did shape my views in seeing how women were treated differently, even religiously, which can be in your social circles as well. So I don't fight with the imposter syndrome because I always assumed that I should have a seat at the table. So I think we need to be raising our young women to assume that's natural instead of something that there should even be a barrier for. And I think sometimes we put that restraint on ourselves. And I have a lot of problems with not feeling attractive enough, or like weight issues, those kind of things. That's where I put a lot of stuff on myself. But as far as the imposter syndrome, I've been blessed not to. But I do think it's our job as women in the positions that most of us are in to mentor women not to have, and especially younger women, to expect that there should be no difference.
Have you ever had other people's expectations, perhaps, and societal norms that have affected how you show up in those places?
Well, I think so. I think now that would be unnatural if we hadn't. And I always like to tell that my whole life has been the life of unexpected paths. So many unexpected paths that seem traumatizing at the time, and every one of them without fail has been a learning experience and something I could grow from. So graduating from Oklahoma State in 1986, wanted to be a loan officer, but had married someone who was a family farmer that had gotten an ag degree, moved back to a small town in Oklahoma, applied to 2 jobs at the local banks to be a junior loan officer. And they really both laughed at me and said, you do realize that we have older agricultural icons here, and they're not going to talk to a young woman about their finances. Now, later, I grew from that because I had to work as a teller, which I thought was very demeaning at that time with my beautifully freshly minted, resume and college degree. But what it did was encourage me to leave that workforce after a few years and start my own business. And I had grown up on an agricultural operation, a cattle ranch, and then had married a farmer. So ag sales was something that was products I was familiar with. I found a product that no one in Oklahoma was selling and went to Texas and got the distributorship. And kind of the same way, showed up and said, I'd like 6 grill guards. Nobody may know what those are, but if you see big heavy duty trucks, if anyone watches Yellowstone, I'm sure a few of you do, when Rip is driving through those fences with the big black pipe on the front, that is a grill guard that protects your truck if you're doing crazy things like taking people to the train station. So that being said, I found a business. I went down there and I said, I'd like a load of these to start. And they said, oh, well, why don't you take 6 and let us know how that goes? Came back a week later and said, when do I get my first semi full? Those are gone. And so same way of that, don't ask permission, just assume you should be in the room, and was kind of my attitude. So there's been things like that. And in ag sales, the same way. This is predominantly a male business. And then running for the legislature in my class of the year I came in 2008, I was the only woman elected in the House or Senate out of 14. So, it's very rare. And at that time, I think we had 11 out of 149 of our representatives were female. I think now it's up in the 20s, but that's still ridiculous. We're half of the population. And until our legislative bodies actually represent our demographic, as in gay, straight, black, white, man, woman, ethnicities, we will never have truly good representation.
You know, one of the reasons I really admire you and follow your leadership is because you are a Republican, but you've been able to pass policies that are nonpartisan, right? Like you've been able to work with both sides. I actually, I'm going to call you out, and I don't know if this is imposter syndrome or a sense of not belonging, but often you say, well, I don't know if I'm just a token Republican, because you get invited to so many Democratic or progressive events as much as you do with your side of the party. But I don't know that it's tokenism. I think that people just respect the fact that you can actually listen to both sides, compromise, which I think that has become an ugly word nowadays. Why do you say that about the tokenism? And tell me, just kind of tell us your experience being a Republican representative that actually has pushed for pretty progressive, especially in the state of Oklahoma, policies.
Yes, I call myself a John McCain Republican who called himself a maverick. I hate the labels. I really hate that we even have to run as a labeled party. I hate labels, period. I'm straight, my daughter is gay, or whatever. I hate us having to label ourselves. So I think I tend to always feel like the best answers come with the biggest consensus in the middle. And, I talk about this a lot. When I ran 13 years ago, I'd never given a speech. I'd never, just was not doing anything in that venue. I ran as being a bipartisan legislator. That was on all my flyers 13 years ago, very well received. If I put that on my flyers when I run for re-election for my second term in a year, I will not be elected, because I am supposed to hate the other side. And in Oklahoma, as a closed primary state, you have to appeal to the people in your own party. First thing I'd love to see Oklahoma do, side note, is go to open primaries. States that have done that tend to take off some of that label and find that 50, 60, 70% in the middle that really just want good government, instead of the loud, squeaky wheels on the far right or the far left. And we see a lot of that in Oklahoma. I worked a lot with Representative Jason Dunnington, who was a Democrat. I was a Republican. He was a more moderate Democrat. I was a moderate Republican. We could find good solutions in the middle to work on, but that has changed markedly in the last 2 or 3 years, that is not as accepted. And I think if we dug down, there's still people that do that, but the loud and angry podcasts, to talk radio, to news channels are telling us not to do that. I will always believe the best solutions come when you take off the labels, sit down with people that have different opinions than you, and learn. And if my parents did one thing right, and I know that they did lots of things right, but it was that they taught us to admit if we made a mistake and to always be willing to change your opinion with better information. So I came in further to the right. I actually believed trickle-down economics worked because I just had only seen the little bits. When I became appropriations chair the year that we had a budget crisis, the worst in history, and did a lot of study, I realized that it was a total fallacy sold to us by wealthy industrialists, that it never worked. And now we've seen that divide grow. The uber wealthy to the uber poor, and we're seeing less in the middle, and that's not working well for us. And we have to acknowledge that those are failed policies. So as I morphed over, that made me very unpopular in my party. And as you know, but you were nice and didn't share, I was fired by the Speaker of the House. And you never want to be, as a politician, above the fold on the front page, right? And so I still got the article, Speaker fires appropriations chair, And the reason he did is I was calling for tax increases. At that time, we were 49th in the nation in overall tax collections. You get what you pay for. If you do not invest in your future, you never change your trajectory. And to take great pride in saying we tax the lowest, well, that means you're not giving anything to school teachers and infrastructure and mental health care and rural health care and the things that affect industry and citizens' lives. So it's been an interesting journey, because after being fired from that, you do kind of have to work your way back up the ladder in a different, direction. So it isn't that I haven't been told no. It's just that I didn't think the no was valid. I thought that that didn't make me a bad Republican. I thought it made me a good Oklahoman.
Absolutely. There's a quick question from Michelle, one of and lots of claps and cheering with emojis. But there's a question from one of our members, Michelle. What will it take? What will it take to get open primaries?
That we have two alternatives in Oklahoma. We are a state that really is a very populous state. So we do a lot of things that the legislature will not tackle through the initiative petition process. Quite a few things that people have never expected to get on that might have seemed more moderate/liberal have. Medicaid expansion passed through initiative petition. Medical marijuana passed through, these are things in an extremely red state you would not expect to see. So it's absolutely possible. What you have to do is have a like-minded group or village to work on those issues because it costs money. You can't just do an initiative petition process and expect to do it without paying for your people to go out and get the signatures and to actually have an advertising campaign to explain what it is. Second alternative would be to get it through the legislature, which they will not do. We are also one of 6 states that still do state party voting, which I hate. It dumbs down the electorate. You don't have to find out as much about issues or campaigns or individuals. And whenever you have a large majority, they're not going to run those kind of bills because they help them. So when you have like more of a 48, 52% majority kind of swing in the House or Senate, then you can get those kind of bills through. We will not have that again for a long time. I believe we're about 85% Republican now. So most Democrat ideas are squashed or not heard.
You talked about something that we've been covering throughout the year at Vest, which is, damn if you do, damn if you don't, right? For women, a lot of us do want to speak out on issues. And then when we speak out, things like getting fired, getting appointed or removed from office happen. And we just get chastised and reprimanded a lot more than our male colleagues do, right? So what do you think, Leslie? I mean, how do we support the women that are trying to do things that are good for everyone? And how do we defend them? How do we keep them in positions of power so that they don't get removed?
That's when you need your village. And, so go back to even just the simple thing, which now seems so small that the banks wouldn't hire me for a loan officer position in small towns because I was a woman, only drove me to be entrepreneurial and start my own business. When I was fired by the Speaker of the House, the advice I got, and I'm going to answer one of your questions early of what's the worst advice you got? Well, why don't you go sit on the back of the bus real quietly for a year? Maybe people will forget. It's like, oh, no. I'm going to keep every time I'm at a lectern, I'm going to say I was removed and I'm okay with that, but I'm not going to be silent that we have to better fund this state. And so all it did was drive me to run for one of the 11 statewide elected officials, leave the legislature 2 years early, and now be in a position that's much higher of authority. So I used it. I had one night to go home and lick my wounds and lay in a fetal position. We all get to give ourselves a bit of grace with that. And then to wake up the next morning and say, damn it, I'm not going to take that. And let's find an alternative path. Now, I'm not going to hit my head on a brick wall, but I'm going to talk to the right people. I'm still going to try to do these things. And all it did was propel me to be able to work at the Department of Labor, running an agency, making more money, having more authority to do things. And, we've done a lot of things at our agency that I feel have been really good, like with the licensing commission, like working to make sure that a felony prohibition in your past would not disallow you from having an occupational license, some things like that. So I've got to go on and work on, it may not have been those same fiscal issues, but other issues. So take your licks and let it embolden you to work out. But I will tell you how many people reached out to me, men and women. I've had equally supportive men in my life as well. And that said, do not let this get you down. I will have your back. Don't you be scared to go to the next caucus meeting. We have to do that. We have to galvanize. When we see someone that has that type of position, be the one that reaches out with the first text, the first call. We have to be there for each other.
you mentioned, we do get on a fetal position, and all of us do. If you say that you don't, you're lying, because we all go through those situations. What do you say to yourself? What do you do? What habits, what routines do you do to get back up and get yourself in the ring?
It's not easy. And any of us that say it is lying. And that's where I would say I had good friends and colleagues that didn't let me drown in that sorrow. Because at that time, that's one of the most influential positions in the state. We were really trying to, at that point, we were so broke in Oklahoma. We're better right now, but that's temporary because the legislature cut taxes again last year to go back to where we were. And that will happen in 23. Very distressing. So we're so thrilled to be a bottom 5 state. We're going to try to be a bottom 3 state or something, and I don't understand that mentality, but I just had so many people around me that were encouraging that I just made myself get up. And as we all know, the first time you show up at work after something like that, it's easier to do it the next time and the next time. And I found my people on both sides of the aisle and kept working for those same issues. And it's just, I think we have to give ourselves grace and we have to find our village.
Yeah, the power of surrounding yourself with people that can lift you. Absolutely. Leslie, I feel like not just in Oklahoma, but in the entire nation, we continue to, because there's that lack of representation in legislative bodies, at the federal, state, local level of more women, I feel like we continue to pass policies that don't serve us, right? And in fact, they hurt us. In Oklahoma, and the pandemic only made things worse, I think, for women. Newsweek did a recent study showcasing that women are set to lose an average of $600,000 in lifetime income. And when you add that to the fact that we already don't have equal pay, when you add that to the fact that we already have a wealth gap pay, right? Like women only get to keep 32 cents on the dollar that our male colleagues get to keep to invest and to start building that wealth. What do you think? How do we enact change to support women in the workplace, honestly, in a place like Oklahoma?
So a lot of times I hear, I'm going to say something controversial, but I'm good at that. So is we always think that if we elect more women, things will be better. Often we elect more women that don't take on those issues. Sometimes a man may do that. And that's where I'm saying you have to be a little careful with just saying we only want more women. Look at their voting history. And I am absolutely a proponent of having, like I said, diversity in the legislature that match your population. But just because somebody is a female doesn't necessarily mean that they advocate for women's issues. So check out your candidates. And all of us are guilty on this. We get busy in our own lives, right? And we're taking the kids to soccer practice and getting dinner on the table and still have that presentation to put together. And it's midnight. You may not have had time to look at how your state representative or your state senator is voting. But if you've elected women that are voting against issues you would agree on, then it may not have been as good to elect a woman. And that may sound like anathema, but I'm just saying we have to look at their voting records. Put your money where your mouth is. I'm willing to go. When my daughter came out a few years ago, which was another one of those journeys of something totally unexpected. And, my ex-husband, his whole family disowned her, the fundamentalist stuff and all that. The first thing I did was start marching in pride parades with her, holding her hand. And I got a lot of pushback from my party for that. And I said, really? Because I thought, now correct me if I'm wrong, that the United States was formed on the separation of church and state. Why have we elected all these people that want to save my soul? Go do that in a pulpit on Sunday morning. I need people to come to the legislature that want to work on good schools, mental health care systems, infrastructure, things that allow a society and its citizens to flourish. And if going out and marching in a pride parade means I don't get elected, then damn it, don't reelect me. I'm not going to change who I am or what I believe I get that vote of approval or non-approval every year at the ballot box, and I'm just going to be me. But if we don't have people willing to push those boundaries of going to March and Pride Parade, which thank you to Mayor David Holt and to the superintendent of Oklahoma City Schools, Sean McDaniel, who are always right there with me and are both registered Republican, it can happen. But if we don't push people in our own party, like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are doing in Congress right now, who are we? What good are we even being there if we aren't going to push that?
Absolutely. And what you just said is not controversial, is something that we should, as women, should talk about. You know, it's sometimes, and we have been talking about at other VEST sessions, the notion that I don't know if it's because there's been so few of us at the top or so few of us that get invited, that we have developed this sense that we must compete with one another as opposed to support one another, or that once we get into those positions of power and influence, that in order to keep that, we have to do whatever it takes, even if it means passing policies that hurt our fellow women or our fellow people, right? So thank you for saying that. Why do you think, what's your take on that, Leslie? How do we change the narrative that, and you're right, it's not just men. I always also speak about most of my mentors, especially when I started, were white man, older white man. And we also talked before with other VEST coaches that, you know, perhaps it was because they didn't feel that we were a threat to them, that we could be a threat to them ever, which is another conversation. But in your experience, how do we change the narrative that women have to compete with one another to enact change? How do we change that?
I think it's real hard to change that without being the change yourself. I mean, it's just kind of like I say a lot of times about pro-life people is, yeah, they're pro-life as long as it's in the uterus. So let's just get rid of that term pro-life and start saying you're pro-uterus or pro-fetus. Because if that's all you care about, you are not a pro-life person. You are not pro-life if you don't want to envelop that poor young mother who had trauma or poverty, or she wouldn't even have considered abortion, with all the wraparound services to change her and her child's trajectory, then you are not pro-life. And so we have to teach our children to be critical thinkers. We have to teach our girls to be strong and to have that village. And we have to teach them and our young coworkers around us that we only get stronger and better by bringing others along with us and pulling them up those ranks at will. I know one of the things I'm working on at Labor right now, there was a bill passed several years ago where we could help encourage some of our employees to get training, college, different things. You have to be a little careful. Like, you know, I can't pay for somebody to go to medical school that's inspecting boilers, but I could encourage them to do some college classes, more certifications, and the state can help cost match or pay for some of that. It's never been utilized. And it's like, why are we not utilizing this? So at our Christmas party this year, we're going to have a big rollout of, I want to see everyone in this room improving yourselves. Your future and your changes start with you. So if you have a program director, they have the information, go to them and see what you can be doing to help change your trajectory, your children's trajectory. Let's help you get in those classes. I want us to be that kind of environment, and we have to do that with young women. So when I love to speak to college groups and these kind of groups, and, you know, and I'm going to do a quick aside here when we're talking about women, is I get so many calls because of the COVID mandates, right? Because of, you know, the businesses do all this. They think all that's coming through the labor department, which it is. That's the federal labor department. It's not us. But I get the calls because they don't know. A lot of people don't delineate between federal and state. And I hear so often, people can't tell me what to do with my body. You know what I'm going to say, Erica? Okay, that's fine. If you want to use that argument for not taking a vaccine, that's fine. But you never get to tell a woman what to do with her uterus, right? That is a hypocrisy. That is, an oxymoron. So if you're going to use that argument, great. But remember, we don't get the luxury of picking and choosing what we put in the recipe and want the cake to come out right. So if you want to use that argument, fine. I think I've made some people pause. I say that to everybody and they look at me like, oh, a Republican telling me that. And I'm like, no, 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 it's hypocrisy, which goes to the core of all these things we do. And if we can't call that out, then and work with people to be better, then we're never changing the circle around us. And I do it with little tidbits or jabs or humor a lot of times, but I will see people ruminate on it and it may change later down the road.
Just on the chat is asking, do you think women step on, compete with each other in order to preserve proximity to male power?
Sure. But I also think men do too. Sometimes we do get caught up. Remember the old boys club or whatever, it may have started as networking. We should emulate that portion of it. Now, we don't ever want to get to the point where we're the old women's club and we would only put women in, because there may be a really sharp young man that is equally evolved because he had a strong mother that raised him, right? And so I just don't ever want us to put those boundaries that have been put on us on others. I wanted to raise my son to value women being strong as much as my daughter. And I think sometimes we get lax of what's going on in our own household. Are we even teaching our children critical thinking skills? You know, they're not going to gain that knowledge like they do, like blinking, swallowing through osmosis or whatever it is. We have to teach them, because I see intelligent people sharing things on Facebook or on different sources that just astonish me. So we shouldn't assume that our own children, you know, that's one other thing we need to be teaching them, how to vet sources, how to, you know, to network, how to do these things. And I think there's a lot more to raising your children than the spelling test and having, you know, your lunch money paid on Mondays.
A lot of VEST members join in because they are kind of moving up in that ladder, right? They're now, maybe they were a solo contributor, now they're in charge of team, and they're figuring out how to scale their progress without getting burnout, because that's another thing the pandemic brought on us, right? Now, 1 out of every 4 women is either downshifting her career or leaving the workforce in general, just because as a result of burnout. And if you're a mother of young children, the number grows to 3 and 4 women. So what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing within your own teams or at the commission, and how are you managing that?
I think the number one problem, okay, we hear a lot on the labor shortage, and I hear a lot of people that are misinformed saying, everybody's just living on the government teat. You know, it's whatever. We're at 3% unemployment. That's practically full employment. 3 things that are causing that is, number one, the medical marijuana industry in Oklahoma came about by initiative petition about 3 years ago on a ballot. They sucked hundreds or tens of thousands of people out of the service industry that didn't have to be educated, that were be paid federal minimum wage, and paid them $12 to $15 an hour in dispensaries, grow houses, and processing facilities. They sucked out that market. That's where those people went. They're not all laying on their couches. Okay. So we had a new burgeoning industry take that. Number 2, we haven't raised the federal minimum wage in the longest time in United States history. Most people do not go to work for philanthropy or fun. Even though we were talking, Constance, it is great when you enjoy your job, then it can be fun. But most people don't go to work for that. They go for the paycheck. They have to pay the bills. They have to have a car. They have to have a home. They have to have food on the table. And if you're not paying anything, and that minimum wage is a big issue that we've got to consider wages and that. But the biggest of all, when I was in the legislature, I always heard people talk about food deserts. That was a term coined about a decade ago. We have childcare deserts all over the state in the United States now. That's one of our biggest problems. So being that patriarchal society, it's mommy that takes care of the kids, not daddy. Not everybody is as emboldened as Pete Buttigieg and his husband, which I loved that he has made a point about a man taking that leave and being there for his children. I love it. What a great example to young men coming up, gay or straight. But we tend to put that off on moms. So even in our agency with 80 employees, we have noticed the ones that we had the most problem, even though we were trying to be very responsive during COVID when we shut down and we're doing work at home and whatever. We spent our CARES dollars on making sure everybody had a new laptop and everyone had good home internet access. We worked with mothers that had kids that were home with a Chromebook in the next room. Still just get your work done. We'll be flexible, but that's the ones we lost. Because not everybody has a grandma next door to watch the kids. That is a luxury that we need to realize is privilege and that not everybody has, right? So if you don't have that and there is not enough childcare, or if there is, it's substandard, of course, women are going to pick to raise their children. We hopefully overall are empathetic, good people. We have to do more. And that's what those ARPA dollars need to be spent on. We need to be pushing for reforms with our legislators, national and state, on child tax care credits, on subsidized daycare. That will end up changing our trajectory as much as anything. When women feel comfortable that there's a quality place to have their children when they are at work, they will feel more comfortable to thrive in their positions.
I have a couple of questions from members. The first one comes from Emma. If you don't mind sharing, what career error or mistake has given you the biggest lesson that you have been able to apply in your current position? Great question.
So I'm going to pick on myself a little bit in that my very first year in, Mary Fallon called me to her office. And when you're a freshman and the governor calls you in, you kind of feel important, right? You know, I've just been out selling truck parts in my jeans every day. She says, I'm watching, you seem like you kind of, whatever. I want you to run a tax cut bill. I didn't know anything about that, but it's like, hey, the governor asked me to do this. I got it through. Now it was very small, 0.25%. And it was at the time when we were realizing that maybe that didn't work. Remember, the Kansas experiment with Governor Brownback basically drove him to bankruptcy, and we were not far behind. So then when I had to come out and call for tax increases a few years later, I was labeled hypocrite. So what do? Every lectern I stand at is I say, man, I own it. I didn't know what I didn't know. I have gained better knowledge with facts and data and changed my opinion. Every time I own my mistakes, it flourishes. People want you to be real. I am so real. I always weigh 20 pounds too much, not because I'm depressed, because I love food. I will admit all these things to myself. I have my frailties. We all do, but I made mistakes. I didn't know what I didn't know. I never ran social issue bills, but I probably was one that voted on bills that said, marriage is between a man and a woman. And then my kid comes out, the ultimate, irony. And it's like, my God, what have I done? Thank God I didn't run those bills and didn't feel that way. Now I'm out charging to make sure we never do conversion therapy, or that we're totally accepting and that there's no gender or race or sexual bias. But before, I didn't know what I didn't know. So let's all give ourselves a little grace, but always be willing to own and verbalize your past mistakes. I think if anything, it helps me. I have self-deprecating humor anyway. So I always say, I'm a George W. Bush student, I was too busy running my sorority and whatever at OSU. And I went to class most of the time, but I graduated with a 3-point and my parents never got on to me. So I think about that a lot. I could have easily done a 4-point, but I was in student government and I was running this organization. You know what? It made me well-rounded. Nobody's ever asked to see my damn resume or my transcript, not once. So give yourself a little grace on that stuff, but also use it. I think that deprecation and humor can be very helpful in people feeling comfortable with you and moving you into those positions. And I think if people see us doing that, maybe it makes them more comfortable at admitting when they've done something that they changed, their mind on.
Absolutely. And this question comes from Vicky, founder of DD Audio. She says, would love your thoughts on employer, not federal, but employer paid childcare.
I love it, but it is expensive and it's hard. So let's be honest, it's not an easy thing to do. But what a fabulous perk. So, I serve on the board. If anyone's familiar with the Potts Family Foundation, wonderful here based in Oklahoma City, but for the state, great nonprofit for young early childhood initiatives. They're really the ones that got Oklahoma educated on what ACEs scores were and resilience and all those types of things. Fabulous. So I serve on their board for Family Positive Workplaces. If no one in this room has heard of that, please Google it. Family Positive Workplaces through the Potts Foundation. Any organization, any business can be a family positive workplace. This means that you encourage people to be mentally healthy, physically healthy families. So if you have that young mom who's struggling, like, am I making enough to even be here? Or am I going to have a gap on my resume? Do I stay home with the kids? You're there for them because you're offering them resources. And that's where great HR directors can do these kind of things. I talk about it, and if everyone knows what Green Shoe is, in Oklahoma, Chad Richardson of Paycom funded Green Shoe, which is a 5-day free mental health service for anyone in the state. You have to put down a retainer or whatever, but like they give it all to you back at the end of the 5 days. It's intensive. It's great. It's a free mental health service. I talk about that. Listen, there will be no shame. There will never be bullying, shame, anything in this workplace. And I need a mental health day once in a while. All of us do. And we used to not talk about that. If the boss will talk about that, if other women will, we shouldn't hold ourselves to think we have to be tougher and whatever. Men wouldn't do that. Now, men probably wouldn't talk about it either, but we need to be encouraging those things as well. And I think if they hear you talk about it, then they're not as embarrassed to, well, if the boss will talk about needing a mental health day, then maybe I'm not weak if my dog of 17 years died and I need to lay in a fetal position today. Okay, we're going to give you the mental health day.
100%. And Robin just stole my question, but she gets it. She says, is Oklahoma ready for a Republican governor with policy views like yours?
But thank you that anyone would even say that. And now this is when I really try not to be the cynic, right? Whatever. It is the era of wealthy white males buying their positions of power. We are not in the era of statesmen running for office, right? So when you see your reps and senators talking about nasty Nancy or building the wall or whatever, those are effing talking points. I did stop myself, Erica. I have a potty mouth and it is like before noon. So I had to be careful of that. But those are talking points. None of that ever gets anything done. And we have to be careful to steer from that rhetoric and really elect people that think that way. So what would be a first step? I am working with a group of people to try to get that open primaries thing on a ballot at some point. I think that would be a huge change. And I think we also may need to consider those kind of ballot initiatives for also things at some point like gerrymandered districts and other things like that we can't get through the legislature. But there's only so many of those you can pass every few years and ask your wealthy philanthropist to fund. I mean, that's a limited source of money. So you have to be real careful on what you can do.
Leslie, what, there were some, first of all, there was a lot of the members that said, I would vote for you too. So it wasn't just Robin and I thinking that. But there's money and politics determines too many of our candidates. What steps should one take? That's the great question, Jess. What steps should one take if they're interested in running for office or making a difference, but doesn't know much about how government works?
Okay, that's great. So you don't know what you don't know. So be willing to do what I did, that even if you come in and make mistakes later, own them, but just try to be the sponge that picks up real data, real facts, and not opinions. I constantly am pulling things from Wallet Hub or the Pew Research Institute that are nonpartisan, that will give out good stats, like we're actually 48th in the roads and bridges, in the nation or whatever, things like that. Because all these little groups that call themselves things, the Heritage Foundation, whatever, they're all funded by the same wealthy people of certain parties with their own, spin on it. So make sure you're getting good information. Talk to a woman that's in there. It is different when a woman runs. I mean, there you had to do some things different. I think I had to dress a bit more professionally. I think I had to do things to not look more professional or to appear more. I had to be a little more careful about not going out for beers every night with the guys after work or whatever. I mean, there's certain things women have to do a little more. Talk to a woman who's been there and find out. The main thing is actually hiring someone you cannot get elected to almost any seat anymore without hiring a professional. And, people used to, the old little mimeographs and things and stick them on doors or whatever. No, you have to have shiny, flashy brochures. And the hardest part, and I loathe it to the core of my soul, is raising dollars. And it's like, I'm having a horrible time right now raising funds for my reelection, because before I just left being A and B chair. So I had all these connections. There's nobody that really gives big money for people that inspect elevators and keep people safe and amusement park rides and workplaces. I don't have a natural constituency, right? So support your representatives and senators. That was not a call for me. That was for your local reps or whatever that are doing good things, because it's hard to raise the money. So do you all remember years ago when people ran for federal office, we used to hear all the time, let's work on campaign finance reform. It was a buzzword we heard all the time, kind of like we heard lock boxes for Social Security dollars and those kind of things. Nobody talks about it anymore. It's as if we've given up, washed our hands of it. That's our problem. Is a U.S. Supreme Court decision done several years ago, Citizens United, said that corporations and individuals could put literally millions of dollars into dirty PAC money, which is legal, to have campaigns and not tell who they were supporting. Well, that's undue influence, and it immediately made things very dirty in politics. It was horrible for that. And we also have where people can self-fund their campaigns. So when someone can drop 5 or 10 million in a race for something that makes 100,000 a year, I'm going to be suspect. Okay. But obviously most people aren't. I'm going to be suspect that they're buying a position of power and they want to get to DC. But as long as people can do that, we're skewing who will go in. So the old days of citizen legislators are getting harder and harder when you have the guy next to you dropping in 4 million for a race. And it's not that he wants to be that, whatever it is, he wants to get to DC and be a power broker. We've got to get away from that. And that's never going to happen without campaign finance reform. And that's on the federal level. We need to hold our congressional and Senate people to a higher standard on pushing for those things again, instead of talking constantly about, for instance, Trump pushed an infrastructure package as big or bigger than Biden just got through. But now every Republican says this is the worst thing in state history. Let's see how many of those Republicans are out at the bridge cuttings, at the ribbon cuttings at the bridges. And it'd be the same thing if it was on the other side with Democrats. I mean, we've got to stop playing those games. People are tired of those games. When I speak real at speeches, people love it. And we've got to get away from clapping for the ones that give the damn talking points.
Leslie, you talked about something that I think it's part of the reason why we don't see more women in office, and that is the bias that exists when women are fundraising for, if you look at the statistics, men candidates get a lot more money. Female candidates get asked even different questions when fundraising and all of that. So I want actionable things that we could do, right? So where can we find your campaign for those of us that want to, Dawn, and this is not why this is Erica putting this on Best Members and putting us, because I do think that accountability matters, right? We have, like you said, we have to keep our members of Congress accountable, our elected officials accountable, but also ourselves accountable, right? Like I used to complain a lot. Now I just look at myself and what have I done? Have I donated? Have I contributed? Have I, not just on Twitter, which I do still do that, but how am I contributing to the causes that I care about and showing up for the people that are doing the work? So I'm putting this on us to keep us accountable. Where could we, if we wanted to, donate to your campaign? And I also want to know where I personally want to stay more engaged into the open primaries, because I've been preaching this since I came to the States, I think.
Well, okay. So first of all, you cast a tiny aspersion on yourself about your Twitter account. I love your badass self on Twitter. So I follow you. So don't quit doing that, because I get a chuckle about once or twice a week. It's like, dang, she went there again. Which is why we're friends.
One of us thinks so.
Yes, I love that. And Twitter's my safe space. Like I always say, I only follow things like the Lincoln Project and Adam Kinzinger or whatever, and Erica and people like that, John Budd, that push envelopes, And I also unfollowed over half the people on Facebook, or I wasn't going to have any friends anymore, because it's like, I just don't even know if I like anybody in my circle, which is really horrible. And I think I'm not the only one that says that. But it's like, I thought you were smarter or kinder or whatever. So if I unfollow, maybe ignorance is bliss. We did not talk about this, and this was not the perfect, but I will throw it out. It is osborne4jobs.com, and Osborne does not have an E, is my site. But the main thing is supporting your local. And that means city councils, that means school boards, that means county commissioners. That means all of these things matter in our day. Have y'all seen what's going on with city councils and school boards? This is concerted efforts by big right fundraisers to throw critical race theory, which is not being taught in our public schools, into whipping people into a frenzy for political gain. And it's ridiculous. Most teachers I know are so overworked just trying to get good curriculum and making sure their children are, it's a sad thing. So support all those kind of races. But that's when we have to make ourselves take a bit of time. I talked about us being busy, and we are. I know that. But take a little time to vet the voting records of these people. If you see people on your school board making dumb decisions, talk to a friend. I have a friend that retired recently, and I said, have you thought about being a CASA volunteer? And she said, well, I never thought about that. And I said, you're the perfect kind to do that. Encourage your friends that have a bit of time free up. If you know more about a candidate, share it with other people. If you say this person says these things on their flyer, but that's not how they're voting, share that information. Information is knowledge. In my speeches, I try to give so much on data, percentage. People, you don't want to overwhelm people like you have a pocket protector and, an engineering degree or a stats degree, but you do need data, and good data, good networks, grace, or surrounding ourselves with that network and believing you should be in the room.
If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review and subscribe to our podcast for future episodes. You can also join the conversation by becoming a VEST member. Go to www.vester.co and apply today.